Hi, I'm Raylyn Worcester, and this is Spreading the Word. That's Word with a capital W, as in the written word, the Bible, and the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ. I'm getting ready to read part 10 of Without Faith. When we left off, Gloria and Dylan had re-recorded the earbuds, and Imelda had just gotten shipped off to Camp Bouse as a fervent. And that's where we pick up the story now. Settle in, get ready, here we go. When Gloria's alarm went off at 6:30 the next morning, she lay in bed a moment. She woke up feeling sad and didn't know why. Then she remembered the events of the day before. She said a prayer for Imelda, that God would keep her safe as she completed the next part of her mission. She prayed the train trip would not be too horrendous for her. It was out of her hands now. She just had to trust that God was in control. Gloria got out of bed and went to her closet to pull her clothes for the day. Then remembered that Imelda would not be here to make the bed. She returned and made the bed before proceeding to get ready for work. Gloria fried an egg and some bacon and took the plate and her coffee out on the patio to eat. The air was sweet and cool, perfumed by the blossoms in the garden beyond. She took a deep breath and felt its calming influence. A bird twittered happily in a tree nearby. Everything seemed so normal on the surface. Gloria swallowed the last of her egg and licked a bit of bacon grease off her hand before wiping it with a napkin. Time to go. As she backed out of the drive, she remembered that Imelda would not be there to wash the breakfast dishes she'd left in the sink. Oh well, she'd do all the dishes tonight after supper. There was no need to come home for lunch anymore. The cottage would feel even more lonely now, she feared. She wouldn't spend any more time there than necessary. Entering the admin building, Gloria went straight to Eric's office. She found the key marked militia on her ring and prayed it would open the door. It did. Gloria entered quietly and locked the door behind her, then began to search the room. There was a floor-to-ceiling cabinet with a lock on it behind the colonel's desk. She tried the militia key in the lock, and it didn't open. She felt a moment of panic, then found the master key on her ring and tried that. This time, the cabinet opened. This cabinet held machine guns, nightsticks, brass knuckles, and other militia instruments. She found 3 cardboard boxes that held the items she'd been looking for in the bottom of the cabinet. The boxes were surprisingly heavy. Gloria left them where they were and proceeded to her office, locking the militia door behind her. Dylan greeted her as Gloria entered her office. She handed him the keys to the militia office door and the master key for the cabinet. She instructed him to take the boxes from the cabinet and load them into his car, then to lock the cabinet back up, lock the office door, and return to their office when he was finished. Gloria anxiously wondered if the guards at the shack would ask what was in the boxes. She needn't have worried. Dylan's credentials kept anyone from questioning him about anything. Still, she heaved a sigh of relief when he walked back through her door. Dylan voiced a concern, though. There were quite a few more earbud sets than he had thought. He wasn't sure his buddy could get them all programmed before the colonel returned. Gloria told him to leave now and take the boxes to his friend, then stay and help him until the job was finished. She could handle things here until he returned. "Yes, ma'am," Dylan replied, heading for the door. And then he was gone. And the colonel was gone. And Imelda was gone. Suddenly, Gloria felt very much alone. With a sigh, she pushed back her office chair, got to her feet, and began her daily tour of the grounds. "You've got to be freaking kidding me!" Jeb was not a happy camper. There were 3 more weeks before the 4th run at the processing center. 3 more weeks before he was supposed to return the train to Oklahoma City. 3 more weeks to fish, hunt, go out of town, do whatever. But no, there's an emergency, Jeb. We need you to take this woman to Oklahoma City and put her on one of the trains marked for Arizona. What? He'd be making that long trip with one woman aboard? It was ridiculous. But here he was. He'd been woken up out of a dead sleep at 5:30 this morning and had boarded the train at 6:10. All smiles, like everything was hunky-dory. "Yes, sir. Whatever you need, sir." And that colonel had the nerve to tell him that he should have had me leave last night, but graciously allowed me to sleep in until 5:30 this morning. Jerk. Well, Jeb thought, it's an unscheduled trip, and I'm not being paid extra for it, so I'm going to do it my way. It was 10 a.m. now, and he was approaching Chicago Union Station. He was going to stop there, stretch his legs, have breakfast in one of their cafes, and get some of that mouth-watering fudge they sold there. This trip might be fun after all. Jeb started to think about his passenger. Who was she anyway? Why was it so important she get to Arizona? He'd heard rumors from Skip, the engineer who drove between Oklahoma City and Phoenix, that his passengers were actually headed to Camp Bouse, which was another couple of hours northwest. But Skip didn't know how they got there from Phoenix, or what happened to them once they arrived at their destination. Well, it really wasn't his concern, was it? 15 minutes later, Jeb pulled into Union Station. He wouldn't take too long here. Just long enough to grab a bite, then he'd be on his way. Didn't want to set off any alarm bells or give that colonel any reason to get him fired after all these years. After consuming a delicious biscuit and gravy washed down with fresh squeezed orange juice, visiting the men's room, and buying 3 different kinds of fudge, he headed back to the train. He consulted the pocket watch he kept in the pocket of the bib overalls that was his uniform, and saw that he'd only taken 40 minutes. Not too bad. Walking back to the train, Jeb really looked at the cattle cars. That was no way for people to travel. He didn't care who they were or what they'd done. He was ashamed that he drove a train that transported people this way. What would it hurt if he treated his passenger, this one woman, with a little dignity? No one would have to know. He could move her back to a cattle car before they arrived at the processing center. Decision made, Jeb began opening cattle cars, looking for the one holding precious cargo. "It's not much," Jeb told the small Hispanic woman he'd found in the 13th car from the front of the train. He noticed the bruises inside one elbow as he'd helped her out of the cattle car and into his little room in a car behind the locomotive. It looked like she'd been manhandled. He got angry all over again. "Gracias, senor. Imelda said, turning grateful eyes to the engineer. Have you eaten anything? He asked. Not since lunch yesterday, senor. I have been in that car since 2:30 yesterday afternoon. Indecent. Unthinkable. Suddenly, retirement didn't seem like such a bad thing to Jeb. You can rest on this cot. I have a little pillow here. There are bottles of water in this little fridge and a tiny bathroom behind that door. I will try to get you some dinner this evening, but for now, you can have some of my fudge, he said, hand extended. Imelda chose a piece of peanut butter fudge. Take two, Jeb generously offered. She chose a chocolate square with walnuts and thanked the kind man again. My name is Jeb, and you are? Imelda, the woman supplied with a smile. Well, Imelda, we better get going. Don't want to raise any eyebrows, do we? It's a long ride. Are you going to be okay? She looked at the cozy car she'd been brought to and thought how good God was to provide this for this stage of her trip. She knew much harder times lay ahead and was grateful for this bit of comfort. I will be great. Thank you for your kindness. Jeb wiped away a tear and headed back up to the locomotive. Time to get on the road. Jeb noticed a small cooler under the passenger seat in the locomotive and pulled it out. He pulled out the Post-it note on which was written, Bon appetit. God bless Chef Francois. He'd probably been yanked out of bed to make him food for the trip. He'd have to save him some fudge as a thank you. He and his passenger would not only have dinner tonight, but breakfast tomorrow, too. He took off out of Union Station, heading for Oklahoma City, whistling as he went. The trip was uneventful, quiet. Imelda probably passed the time sleeping. Too bad she didn't have something to read, Jeb thought. It was 5:30 p.m. the day after they'd left, and they were approaching Fort Worth Central Station. Here he would stop just long enough to put Imelda back in her cattle car. There would still be 4 more hours to Oklahoma City, but it was the closest stop to make the switch. It was the best he could do. When he was 30 minutes out of Oklahoma City, he had instructions to call Colonel Greenbaugh. He could hardly wait. Yeah, right. Jeb would be at the processing center in approximately 35 minutes. It was 9 p.m. in Oklahoma County, 10 p.m. in Lawrence Township, Indianapolis. He hoped the colonel was already in bed. Speak, the colonel answered the phone on the first ring. We will be pulling into the processing center in approximately 30 minutes, sir. I expected your call an hour ago, the colonel replied tersely. Why the delay? Debris on the tracks from a storm in Chicago. Had to stop at Union Station while they got a crew out there to remove it. Figures, the colonel thought grumpily. Good thing I flew in for my meeting. I could have been on that train with him. And the containee? Colonel asked. I don't know. Was I supposed to check on her? I don't even know what car she's in. Jeb lied with more satisfaction than at any other time in his life. Very good. I will meet you at the train myself when you arrive. Yes, sir, Jeb replied and disconnected the call. The colonel was in Oklahoma City? He didn't relish the thought of seeing the colonel again, especially in the dark. That man gave him the willies. Oklahoma City. The train pulled up to the processing center at 9:38 p.m. The floodlights outside the center perfectly illuminated the track and any business being conducted there. It reminded Jeb a bit of the Las Vegas Strip at this time of night. Two men waited to greet him as he debarked the train. One was Colonel Greenbaugh. In this light, he looked like a big grizzly bear. His smile looked predatory. But that was surely just his imagination. And next to the colonel stood Supreme General. How nice to see you again, Jeb said, approaching the general. I didn't expect you to come out this late at night to greet the train. Jeb didn't exactly like the general. He knew who he was and what he represented. But unlike the colonel, you knew where you stood with the general. There was a strange kind of honesty in that, which Jeb respected. The general shook Jeb's hand. I wanted to personally thank you for making this impromptu trip. I know we interrupted your well-deserved vacation. Both men turned at the sound of a cattle car being opened. In the space of time it had taken Jeb and the general to have this brief conversation, the colonel had walked 13 cars down the line. Now both men watched as the colonel hauled a small Hispanic woman out of the car by her arm. In his mind's eye, Jeb could see the colonel's fingers curled into the same bruises above Imelda's elbow that he'd seen yesterday. He knew in his knower that the colonel was responsible for them. For the rest of your vacation? What? Oh, the general had asked him about plans for the rest of his vacation. In that moment, he decided it was now or never. I'd actually like to extend my vacation, General. To make up for these 2 missing days, of course, that can be arranged. Actually, sir, I'd like to retire. I'm of the age and my old back can't tolerate what it used to. And neither can my stomach, he silently added. The colonel hauled Imelda to another train on another track, not under the floodlights, but he'd brought a flashlight for this purpose. It irritated him that she didn't protest, didn't struggle. It wasn't natural to be so calm in these circumstances. He opened another cattle car and lifted her up into the pitch-black cavern and slammed the door shut. She would stay there until morning, when the train would leave for its destination. He began walking back to the general and Jeb. I will miss you, Jeb, the general replied. You've been a good, loyal staff member, but you earned this retirement by your cooperation in this unscheduled trip during your vacation. Jeb spied the colonel returning. He had something to ask the general, something he didn't want the colonel to hear. Thank you, sir. I have one final request, if I may. The general nodded. I'd like to spend a few minutes walking among the trains here tonight, for old time's sake. I've spent my entire life with them. I'd just like to say goodbye. I know that sounds corny. Not at all, Jeb, the general said as the colonel walked up. Take your time. The colonel and I are going back inside. Come find us when you finish your business, and we will arrange for sleeping tonight and a plane ticket home in the morning. Jeb and the general shook hands one last time, and Jeb and the colonel ignored each other as both parties went their separate ways. Jeb headed back to his train. He watched until he could no longer see the 2 officers, then opened the passenger door of the locomotive and looked in the cooler that Chef Francois had packed. He took the remaining lobster roll, the rest of his fudge, and the 2 remaining bottles of water from the little fridge in his quarters off the locomotive and headed out to find Imelda. He switched on the flashlight app on his phone. He'd heard the colonel say she was headed for Arizona. He just had to find that train. Skip had told him that the Arizona train was designated TC5. Jeb took his time, methodically checking the front of each train. He had permission from the general if anyone should happen to see him, so there was no need to hurry or to take the time to remain hidden as he searched. What seemed like hours, but was actually 20 minutes later, Jeb located the correct train. But which car was she in? These trains held 52 cars. And like a light bulb over his head, Jeb suddenly knew. He started at the locomotive and counted down 13 cars. He opened the door and saw only blackness inside. Had he been wrong? He would never find her now. Imelda, he spoke into the darkness. The small woman walked forward from the dark corner she'd been huddled in. Do you have to pee? He asked. The woman nodded her head quickly, excited at the thought of not having to soil herself. She'd already held it for over 4 hours and knew she'd be in that car for probably another day. Jeb lifted her down and turned his back as she squatted next to the train track. She couldn't wipe, and the underwear felt wet when she pulled them back up, but she was wearing 3 pair in preparation for this trip. The inside ones were wet. The outside ones held the Bible pages, and she'd swapped the wet ones for the middle pair, leaving the wet ones out to dry when she was once again alone inside the car. When she finished and stood, Jeb lifted her back onto the train and handed her the food and water. Stash the empties in a far corner somewhere when you're done, he instructed. But this is all there is. You'll need to make it last a while. Imelda hugged the precious angel God had sent her. I will never forget you, Imelda told him. Neither will I, the spirit promised her. Jeb shut the cattle car door, and he was gone. Imelda woke with the jerk of the train as it left the processing center. She was surprised to find she'd slept at all. It was after 10:30 p.m. when Jeb left, and she'd spent another 20 minutes sorting out the underwear situation. She'd removed her shoes and her pants and took off all 3 pairs of underwear before putting the dry middle pair back on. She laid out the damp pair on the floor at the end of the car furthest away from where she intended to sleep. Then, realizing that the pair that held the Bible pages would make a halfway decent pillow, bunched it under her head and lay down. That's how you meditate on the word day and night, she thought with a chuckle. She might as well laugh while she could. The metal floor was hard and cold, but the 2 pairs of socks helped, and at some point she must have drifted off. As she slept, the movie reel played instructions for her mission in Arizona. Gloria would be coming to Camp Bouse after visiting all the other camps to gather evidence of her expose about a year from now. In the meantime, those sold out to Christ were being slaughtered under the blade of a guillotine on a daily basis. It was Imelda's mission to unite and encourage the body of Christ located there, reminding them why they were there and whom they served. She had the supreme general's word that she would remain unharmed to carry out her mission until Gloria arrived. After that, well, that was up to God. Indiana. Lord, what's wrong with me? Gloria silently prayed. Everything. She was bored. She had all the documentation she needed from this camp, and she still had just over 2 weeks before she could leave for the next one. She was anxious. She hadn't heard from Dylan, and the colonel was due back tomorrow. She was dreading spending the next 2 weeks with the colonel, trying to find excuses not to go out with him while pretending that she really wanted to. And she was fat. She'd been eating gourmet dishes prepared by Chef Francois every day, and her suit trousers were getting snug, and she was more comfortable leaving the jacket unbuttoned. The pity party was nearly in full swing when there was a knock on her office door. Gloria crossed the room and opened the door to find Dylan balancing a big box on one hip and trying to knock on the door without dropping it. She helped him in and they set the box on Gloria's desk. 2 more out in the car, he said. Dylan looked exhausted. She doubted he'd slept over the past 4 days. Take them to militia, Gloria said. I'll go open the door and the cabinet. Gloria grabbed one set of the earbuds out of the box on the desk and slipped them into her ears as she walked to the colonel's office. It was a quality job. It sounded so much like the colonel, she had to listen a while to hear the message to determine that they had actually been reprogrammed. 20 minutes later, all 3 boxes were there where they had found them, in the bottom of the cabinet in the colonel's office. Gloria double-checked the office to make sure nothing was out of place, locked the cabinet, and then the door behind them. Dylan slumped into the chair at his desk. I owe you big time, Gloria started. Dylan held up his hand and shook his head. You paid the programmer. I owe you for that, she insisted. My contribution, he said. However, I wouldn't mind a paid vacay. She nodded. I will call the general and get it okayed. In the meanwhile, go home and get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Really? Really. Dylan drug himself out the door and to his car. He made it to his condo, in the door, and laid down on his bed fully dressed before he was out like a light. That night, Gloria called the general. Gloria, good to see you. Is everything all right? Yes, General. Things are winding down here. Most of the training is complete, and final testing will be done next week. Then we will have a graduation ceremony where the trainees become staff and get either a militia or gray and black uniform, get their numbers removed from their foreheads, and have their names reissued. Very good. To what, then, do I owe the pleasure? She came right to the point. 2 things, actually. I've been very pleased with my assistant, Dylan. He's proved to be unquestioningly loyal to me, and I don't relish having to choose, then get to know, then train another assistant at each facility. If he agrees, I was wondering if Dylan could be my permanent assistant and travel with me. Well, that would be more efficient, I suppose. I have no objections. Rather than finding housing for 2 of you at each city, would you be opposed to me finding a 2-bedroom place for you to share? That would be perfect, General. Okay, then, what is request number 2? Dylan has only been with me a couple of months, but he's been putting in many extra hours without complaint or compensation. I'd like to give him a paid vacation. I see. The general pretended to consider this request very carefully. Then he said, the colonel will be back tomorrow. How about if I let him handle the rest of the training schedule at Fort Benjamin Harrison, and you and Dylan can leave for your next assignment this weekend? You can take your time driving and stop at any tourist attractions you might like to see. You'll have about 2 weeks before you are required to arrive at Fort Hays in Columbus, Ohio, which is only about 3 hours away from Fort Bend. Will that suffice? That's more than generous, General. Thank you very much. My pleasure, Gloria. I take care of those who take care of me. He disconnected the call. And just like that, everything she'd been whining about earlier in the day had been resolved. She bent over to remove her shoes, and her trouser button popped open. Well, almost everything. Somewhere near Dallas. The train had been moving for 4 hours now. It was dim in the car, but not dark, the ventilation slats providing small horizontal shafts of light here and there throughout the car. This trip for Imelda was much different than that for the thousands of others who were transported to the processing center in droves. She had the large car to herself. She could stretch out, walk around, do sit-ups or lunges if she grew stiff. She had food and water, which she rationed. She would be in this car for 40 hours. She only knew that it would be more than a day. When she had to use the restroom, she went to a far dark corner of the train. She completely removed shoes, socks, pants, and underwear so as not to accidentally soil any of them, and put them back on when she finished. But probably the biggest difference was Imelda knew where she was going, what would happen when she arrived, and she had something to do while she waited to get there. Imelda drew the Bible sheets one at a time from her pillow. She carefully creased the page in thirds. She bent the page on each crease back and forth 10 times, wearing the paper along the folded lines a little more with each bend, then carefully tore the sheet along the creases. Each page, now in thirds, she carefully folded each third into a square, small enough to conceal in the palm of her hand. She then pressed each square flat beneath her shoe on the floor of the train so that it laid as flat as possible. Then she put the square in one of the 4 pockets of her scrubs. There were 2 roomy pockets in the top and 2 in the pants. She alternated pockets so the squares would be evenly distributed and not too bulky. When her hidden treasure began to give itself away, she would redistribute some to her outer layer of panties and line her shoes with the precious papers, if necessary. Thy word have I hid in my heart, and my panties, and my shoes, that I might not sin against thee. The Imelda Revised Version. She worked tirelessly for hours, then took a break, walked around, took a swig of water, and when she guessed it to be around breakfast, lunch, or dinner time, took a bite of the lobster roll. Any other time, taking a bite of the fudge. It really didn't matter what she ate when. It was just a little game to keep her mind fresh and focused. Like her revised Bible verses. And so the time and miles passed, Imelda intent on her task and the mission ahead. When all the pages had been torn, folded, and hidden on her person, Imelda sang. There was no one to hear her but God, and it was to him she lifted her clear, strong voice of praise. And the long trip didn't feel so long because she knew she was not alone. Normally, this trip from Oklahoma City to Phoenix would have required 3 train changes. However, much preparation went into this system before the processing center and the camps were ever used for the first time. The cattle car trains had designated tracks that other trains didn't use. They had militia insignia and for official use painted on every car. None of the cars were graffitied like other trains. Penalty for doing so was to be tossed aboard themselves and hauled away forever. These trains didn't transfer passengers to other trains at each major city's Union Station. Instead, they switched tracks as they changed direction. The engineers of each were specifically chosen and trained to make the long trips nonstop. Imelda didn't know any of this, of course. She only knew that God had miraculously made a way for her to travel in relative comfort and complete isolation, so she had the freedom to complete her task undetected. It was for this that she now lifted her voice in praise. Across the nation. One by one, the pounds of coffee that Catherine repacked and shipped out arrived at their destinations. There were 5 altogether. 4 of the recipients were pleased to discover that the unexpected package they'd received was not the Roman roast coffee it masqueraded as. They each surmised where the package had come from and were thankful to have such a precious gift. Dorothy Jo did not share their sentiments. When her package arrived unannounced, she was excited to see that someone had remembered her birthday after all. She hurriedly opened the package to find a pound of Roman roast coffee. What a unique and thoughtful gift! She'd never tried this kind before. In fact, she'd never heard of it, but fancied herself a coffee connoisseur and was eager to brew a pot. As she slit open the foil at the top of the package, Dorothy Jo, she went by Jo now, felt her anticipation turn to anger. This wasn't coffee. It was a Bible. And immediately she knew where it had come from. The woman on the secret church page knew it was a risk to include her niece on the list of Bibles she wanted sent. Her niece was not a believer, was living a lifestyle her aunt didn't agree with, and the two were not even on speaking terms. But the aunt held out hope for her niece's salvation if she would just open the book and read a little. She believed the truth of the word could penetrate her niece's hardened heart. She felt she had to at least try to reach her. Jo looked at the box her coffee had come in. There was no return address. She knew her aunt was behind this stunt, but she had no way to be certain. It would devastate her mom if her sister were arrested. But this was illegal. Something had to be done about it. Someone needed to know that Bibles were being shipped to people disguised as coffee. She looked at the foil again, from which she pulled the unwanted book. On the back panel was a sticker, a logo. It said, Heavenly Coffee, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. Zach, this is crazy. I know what the Lord showed me, Bridget, and we've only got 3 days to prepare. Bridget sighed. Okay, what do you want me to do? First, go home and pack for a month away. Nothing fancy, comfortable clothes. You don't need makeup or accessories. Make sure you grab a month's worth of any medications you take. Then take this list and these coolers and go shopping. Meet me back here when you're done. I'm closing shop for the day. I've got a lot to do. So use your key when you get back, okay? She nodded her agreement and gave Zach a nervous hug. It'll be okay, he told her. God is with us. That's why we were given this heads up. Not convinced, but trusting Zach, Bridget left to complete her errands. While she did, Zach had his own list to attend to. First, he called a local printer and had out-of-business banners made. They said they could have them done in 2 days. He got 2 semi-comfortable cots, pillows, and bedding, and a small refrigerator and hot plate, and arranged them all in the secret room behind the bottles. When Bridget arrived, they took the items she brought with her into the room as well. Bibles had been flying out the coffee shop over the last few months, and there was nearly one entire wall of shelves empty. These he filled with the groceries and supplies that Bridget had purchased. He designated one shelf for his toiletries and personal items, and another for Bridget's. The next day was business as usual at Heavenly Coffee. No one had a clue about the events that would unfold the following day or the plans Zach had in place to navigate them. Zach got a call about 4 p.m. that his banners were ready, and he left Bridget in charge while he ran out to get them. When he returned, it was time to close. He waited 45 minutes after the last customer left, then went outside and put up the banners across the windows of the shop and a sign on the door. Then he went inside, locked the door, pulled the blinds, and shut out all the lights. He and Bridget went into the secret room where they planned to hide out for the next month. When the militia arrived the next morning to arrest the coffee shop owners for possession and unlawful distribution of illegal materials, they found the door locked and out of business signs on the building. "Breach," the militia officer commanded. His crew broke open the lock and entered the coffee shop. It was empty. They searched the old-fashioned men and women's bathrooms and the storage room beyond the coffee counter. All were empty, and nothing was out of place or raised any red flags. There was no one here to arrest. Convinced the coffee shop was indeed out of business, the militia left, securing the door with a chain and padlock to keep vagrants from inhabiting the abandoned business. Arizona. The train pulled into Phoenix Union Station on its designated track at 10:08 p.m. the day after it had left Oklahoma City. The car had been pitch black inside, and Imelda passed the time by sleeping as much as she could. She woke up when the train's brakes began screeching as they slowed, then stopped with a jolt. Now she sat, eyes wide, trying to see anything in the darkness, and waited. She thought for a second about the waste, both the empty water bottles and the organic that littered a dark corner of the train, and hoped they would be found and removed before the other occupants were crammed into this car. But it was beyond her control. Best not to worry about it now. She didn't have to wait long before armed militia yanked open the cattle car door and beckoned her to come out, or they would come in after her. Imelda didn't have to be told twice. She walked toward the lighter shade of dark the open door provided. Once there, she was helped down and taken by the arm to a waiting Army deuce and a half. It was a large truck with a curved, tarped canopy, like the ones she'd seen in old war movies. So the government still has and uses diesel fuel, she thought. Interesting. Prior to being lifted into the back of the truck, a blindfold was placed over her eyes, and her hands were cuffed in front of her to a chain put around her waist, so she could not remove the blindfold. No one but the people who worked there knew how to get to Camp Bouse. Imelda prayed and sang softly, the road noise covering the sound as the old military truck rambled on. They were headed northwest for 2 hours to a spot in the middle of the Mojave Desert that no one knew existed. Camp Bouse, once a secret desert training installation, located 25 miles outside of the tiny town of Bouse, Arizona, was a secret well kept when it was in use. Now that it was supposedly deserted and condemned, it had become a forgotten piece of history that no one would travel 25 miles through unbroken desert in the Arizona heat to try to find. It was the perfect location for the clandestine activities the camp had been resurrected for. They pulled into the compound at 12:40 a.m. Imelda couldn't see the 30-foot tall steel walls that surrounded Camp Bouse or the illuminated guard shacks that sat every 20 feet atop the wall, like the worst maximum security prison ever constructed. She was picked up and set down outside the truck and escorted by our militia, who entered a code in a keypad on a nearly imperceptible door in the wall, entering the camp. Immediately inside to their left was a 10 by 20 holding cell in which they left Imelda until morning. They did not remove the cuffs, chains, or blindfold, but they would eventually, Imelda knew. She got as comfortable as she could and tried to sleep again until someone returned to deal with her later in the day. Oklahoma City. Colonel Greenbaugh was having a rough couple of weeks. He'd been looking forward to the militia meeting in Oklahoma City. It was the time when promotions were given and awards were handed out. Eric received neither one. He'd come up too quickly through the ranks as it was, the general told him. It was someone else's turn for a long overdue promotion. He had to smile and congratulate others and make nice, while inside he fumed. Then there was that debacle with Gloria's housekeeper. Her treachery was going on right under his nose for how long? It made him look uninformed, incompetent. Gloria, discovering the traitor, made her the general's new golden child, a position Eric had always held. Before she came. Then there was Gloria herself. He wanted her as much as he despised her. Truth be told, he was just infuriated that she didn't drop her panties at the first sight of his baby blues and charming smile, like most of the other women in his life had. But she promised him a date when he returned, and he intended to collect on everything he had coming to him. So when the general told the colonel, as he was packing to return to his fort, that he was sending Gloria and Dylan early to her next assignment at Fort Hays, it was a knife in the gut. He wouldn't be getting that date, much less anything else from her. They'd never even shared a kiss. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere came the thought, it won't be the same at Fort Benjamin Harrison without her. And the colonel realized too late that he was actually going to miss her. I hope you enjoyed part 10 of Without Faith. So, what is life going to be like for Imelda at Camp Bouse? What's going to happen when the colonel gets back to Fort Benjamin Harrison? And what is vacation going to be like for Gloria and Dylan? Well, you'll just need to stay tuned to part 11 to find out. As always, please remember to share this with friends and family so they can enjoy Without Faith like you have been. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And in this way, you too can help spread the word. God bless you.